What computer specs should I have in order to run architecture programs? What are the minimum system requirements? And what are the best computer specs to consider to have an ultimate performing computer? Well, in this video, I'm gonna compare all the computer specs needed for all of the various programs in architecture and provide recommendations for the best performing computer and the minimum requirements as well. So if you're interested, let's get started. So before we dive into all of the specs that are needed, I want to mention that this depends on the programs you're about to use for architecture. Now, I'm going to be taking it from my perspective using the programs that I use on a daily as a design architect. So I work on a lot of the concept design development phases of a project that involve a lot of software. So that includes rendering, 3D modeling, and so on. So I'm going to run through and compare the minimum requirements that you need from those programs and also looking at recommendations as well for those programs. So here we have a chart which starts to compare all the programs, and I divided them into 3 buckets. So we have the 2D programs and we have 2 sectors. One is for Mac system and Windows, and then we also have the 3D programs, and then we also have 3D rendering and visualization programs, which I've limited only to 2 because, you know, as you're in architecture, we're not experts and specialists in 3D rendering. We are more just getting visuals for studies and so on. So let's dive into the 2D programs. So for 2D programs, we have the Adobe Creative Suite, which is very important because you're going to be using Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign in this. And I always say that these are your bread and butter because this is how you edit photos, edit your renderings. You're going to be editing and creating diagrams in Illustrator. You're going to be putting together presentations with InDesign. Here we have the Windows requirements on the left, and on the right we have the Mac requirements. Now, they're kind of similar. They do vary a bit here and there. So what I did is I grabbed all the spec requirements for your computer off of the individual software. So this is all from the programs themselves, and these are the system requirements that they list. Now, a lot of them, what they do, which is really nice, is they provide the minimum requirements and the recommended requirements. So you'll see here they have the minimum and recommended. I would rely more on the recommended side, and I would say that in this case, what's also important to note when you're trying to look at computer specs is that there is no clear answer here. That's one thing. And it's important to note that I feel like there's different levels here as well. You have more complex projects that really do require more memory, better graphics card. And then you have, you know, I would say an in-between middle where it's like not very simple projects, but they are a little bit more complex. And then you got the really simple projects. So I would look to something in the in-between stage if you are a student or if you are getting into the industry as well. We're gonna dive into this, and I'm also gonna provide my personal recommendations because I've had experience, of course, with computers and working on them, and I've on occasion in the beginning of my career as a student, I always got the message of low memory. So for me, memory and a graphics card is critical. Here you have the recommended kind of processors. So you got Intel and AMD, and then you got the operating systems. So they're recommending you have at least Windows 10, 64-bit. But here you have the Mac requirements. So in terms of processors, they're about the same. Operating systems, they indicate what operating system you should have at minimum. You need the Big Sur version 11 and so on. And so in terms of RAM, they're saying at minimum you need 8 gigabytes. I wouldn't aim for minimum. I really would aim for at least 16 gigabytes, if not 32. And at the end, I'm going to give you my ultimate recommendation because again, these are just for the 2D work recommendations. Then you need to lay over top of that rendering, which takes a lot out of your computer, Revit and 3D programs. So they're recommending at least 16 gigabytes here. And then in terms of Illustrator, you need at least, again, Windows 10, you need at least 16, they're recommending 16 gigabytes. I would say that too. I found that when I'm working in Illustrator and with diagrams, that can take up a lot of memory, especially if you're doing more complex drawings. 16 is the minimum, I would say, and if you could get more than 16, and you're gonna see that later on, I would get more than that because it does use up, and once we get into Photoshop, which we will, certain effects also take a lot out of your computer, and they're saying that you need at least 2 gigabytes of disk drive space available, which I have to say disk space, your storage is important too. You want to make sure that you have room to install the programs plus room that you have the computer kind of empty so that it could run these programs, and you want to make sure you have that additional free space so that you could do other things. And it's important to note that they are recommending an SSD card, which I have to say when I actually got into my computer, getting an SSD card made a huge difference with the PC. And then the Mac side, they also recommend an SSD, a minimum 8, but they recommend 16. Again, I would go a little bit more on that. And they have recommendations on the screen resolution for your monitor. And then now we get into the graphics card. It's a little bit easier, I have to say, if you're getting a Mac. When you're getting a PC, you really got to get into each individual components versus getting a Mac. It's still good to understand what you should be looking at despite this. So they have a few recommendations for your graphics card on the Mac. And then for the PC side, they actually go ahead and list. So they say you need a minimum of 1 gigabyte of VRAM, and they actually mention the supported devices. Now, again, I would really pay attention to this because if you're getting an older graphics card because you're getting a deal, I would pay very close attention because it might not support programs. This is something that I didn't get an older graphics card. My computer is just old, my PC desktop, and my graphics card cannot run the latest Photoshop or InDesign. So I think it's important to pay attention to the graphics cards that you should be looking into. And so they have a list of NVIDIA graphics cards, AMD, and Intel as well. And for InDesign, I find InDesign is not so heavy. They're recommending about the same amount of RAM. You need at least 4 gigabytes minimum, and then they're recommending 16. And you need to make sure you do have some additional free storage space so that programs can run without any issues. You don't really need a crazy graphics card. It's not InDesign that's going to be taking a lot of that performance. Mainly, you're going to have Illustrator and Photoshop taking a lot of that heavy load. And I'm surprised that they don't list Photoshop. Oh, they do. They do have a list of graphics cards as well that they would recommend for Photoshop, because Photoshop is another program that is really heavy to run, because if you're adding effects and so on, that really takes a toll on your computer. So something to look into. So those are the minimum and recommended specs for your computer according to Adobe Creative Suite. Now, the other 2D program that we use a lot in the industry is AutoCAD. It's still used despite there being Revit. CAD is not the heaviest program out of them all, especially if you're just doing 2D drawings. Now, in my day, there used to be 3D modeling in AutoCAD. Now, that's not used anymore, and it's not as common in the industry. Back in the day, there was a thing called 3D rendering and 3D modeling in AutoCAD. I actually got into that myself, but now you don't do that, and it's kind of pointless. There's a lot of steps involved to do something so simple, and now there's Rhino, there's Revit, so you don't really need to get into that. And so basically, these are kind of the system requirements for the Windows side. Memory, they're recommending at least a basic 8 gigabytes. They're recommending 16 gigabytes, and they also have some processor recommendations, which is also very important to keep an eye out. Some screen resolutions and graphics cards. Again, not too many system requirements, and they also provide the disk space of what the program will take up on your program. And then here are the Mac specs as well. So that's AutoCAD. Now let's get into the 3D programs. Now this is where things get a little hefty and we start to really get into more of the heavy specs as well. And I'm gonna go into Rhino 3D, I'm gonna go into SketchUp, and then on the side here, I'm gonna go into Revit. And so within these 3 programs, we're gonna go into the specs for the programs and then dive into the plugins, which that would include mainly, we're gonna talk about the rendering plugins. So for Rhino, the Windows, and it's important to take a note that it used to be that Grasshopper was a plugin for Rhino, but now with Rhino 5, it actually comes integrated with the program. So in terms of hardware on the Windows side, you're gonna need to have a 64-bit Intel or AMD processor. Now, what I would recommend is an i9 if you want to future-proof your computer. You could get an i7, but when I was building my PC at the time, and I'm gonna get into this probably in another video, I went for the latest kind of Intel card, and it was an i7 at the time, and it's still around. And I'm glad I did that because I can still run some programs. It's just my graphics card, because it's so old and it wasn't the best graphics card at the time. But I would definitely recommend, if you're looking to have the computer for more than 3 years, 5 5 years, 10 years like myself, I would recommend getting the latest Intel, like an i9, and it also runs better as well. So in terms of memory, they're saying a minimum of 8 gigabytes or more is recommended. That's the minimum. I would definitely go more than 8. They're recommending kind of 600 megabytes of disk space, and they also are recommending in terms of 4 gigabytes video RAM, so for the graphics card, and they have system requirements, so you need to could have Windows 8, 10, or 11, but again, 8 would not work with the Adobe Creative Suite, so something to keep in mind. You need an internet connection in order to validate your license. Oh, sorry, I should say Windows 8.1 because Windows 8 is not supported or older, so you need 8.1, 10, or 11. The good thing about Rhino right now is there is also a Mac version of the program, so you don't need to run the boot camp or run parallels on your computers, and it doesn't run on Linux or Chromebooks and so on, so that's something good to keep in mind. So the nice thing about Rhino 3D is, again, you can run it on your Mac system, and the following are the specs for it. So they're saying you need at least 5 gigabytes of disk space, AMD graphics processor on Intel Macs, or like an M1 chip or something, 8 gigabytes of memory at minimum. More is definitely recommended, I would say. Intel Mac or the Silicon Mac, or in terms of its processor. So they also mention what they don't support, so keep that in mind with your older computers as well. So now diving into plugins. Usually when I work in Rhino, I like to render it with a plugin. You could also render through the native rendering engine of Rhino, but I always like to use V-Ray, and the nice thing about V-Ray is it does produce a nice quality to it. It does take more time to render. Enscape is a lot faster, so you might like that a bit more. So for Rhino, you could run the plugin for V-Ray. So you got the option of running V-Ray or Enscape. For V-Ray, you need at least 8 gigabytes of RAM at minimum, and they recommend 16 or more. Definitely would recommend 16 or more as well. And you need hard disk space. You need at least 2 gigabytes, and they actually recommend 12 gigabytes of additional downloadable content space. They also have some graphics card recommendations, which are here, and they have another recommended video driver here if you click on that link. There's currently 3 versions of Rhino, so there's 5, 7, 8, and supported operating systems as well listed here. The plugin for V-Ray is currently not available on Mac systems, so SketchUp is available both on Windows and the Mac system. So in terms of software, they recommend having 2 gigahertz processor. They recommend as well having 8 plus gigabytes of RAM, 2 gigabytes of available hard drive space, so it's about the same on both. Where it varies from Mac and Windows is the graphics cards, because with the Mac you're getting everything kind of integrated with the system. For the graphics card, they're recommending at least a 1 gigabyte of memory or higher. Definitely would recommend more. And they also have a list of graphics cards that they would recommend. So minimum hardware they have listed here, and the ones that I just mentioned are the recommended hardware, which I would say should be a little higher than what they're saying here. Because again, it really depends on the complexity of the project. If you're running really complex projects, I definitely think you need more than 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's not enough. And here you have your Mac as well. For SketchUp, you're also able to run a few plugins. There's V-Ray you can use in the Windows side. V-Ray again is not available on the Mac side, so you can't run that on SketchUp through the Mac, but you can run Enscape. So Enscape is available both in SketchUp, in Mac, and in Windows. So that is definitely great that you can run Enscape on both. And this is relatively new that Enscape is now able to run on the Mac SketchUp system, which is awesome. And so here they have a few of the specs on the V-Ray side for the Windows. And for the Enscape, I'm going to be giving you the specs on that toward the end. Now let's dive into Revit. Can't emphasize this enough. It really depends on the complexity of the projects. And then they break down your graphics cards, operating systems. You need Windows 10 plus onwards, Windows 11. Here we have the Revit requirements for Windows. Now, unfortunately, Revit is not available on Mac. However, if you do have a Mac system and you're trying to run Revit, there are several things that you can do. You can run Boot Camp if your system allows you to do that, or you can run Parallels on your Mac system in order to run both your Revit and your Mac programs as well. That's how you can do it. You can also do remote access. That's if you have another computer running that software and you can access that with your Mac computer through, let's say, a log me plugin or a team viewer program. So that's kind of the only con. It's a bit of a con in terms of using a Mac for that situation. I have done bootcamp in the past. I would say I have mixed feelings about it. You can do it, and I love using Mac for laptops. So I've done the bootcamp system, and usually what I do is I have a laptop and then I have a desktop. My desktop is typically a PC unit, and then I have a Mac system for my laptop, because for laptops, I really like the MacBooks. I've gone through quite a few laptops. They all die on me, and the MacBook has really lasted on me. Let's just go into the Windows requirements. They're saying that you need a minimum 8 gigabytes of RAM. We're listing here are the entry level configuration, and then down here you're getting a balanced price and performance type of computer. So they're recommending 16 gigabytes, and then down here for more large complex models are recommending 32. I would go a little higher than 32 if you are doing more complex stuff. And so they list also the operating systems and your video card adapters as well, and what you need for those. Now let's dive into the rendering. So we dived a little bit into Enscape as a plugin that you can use within the other programs to produce some of the conceptual renderings for your studies as an architect or designer. In terms of Enscape on the Windows side, it's available on Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, AutoCAD, Vectorworks. So those are kind of the main programs. For the Mac side, it's only currently available on SketchUp. We get into the specs here. They outline kind of the graphics cards that they would recommend at minimum. Then they have recommendations that you should kind of look into for graphics card. And then if you are doing VR, virtual reality, renders and so on, they have recommendations for your card there as well. And so I'd make sure to take a look at this as well and look into that. Also provide graphic card recommendations that you should look into for the Windows side. So some of the NVIDIA graphics card that they would recommend. And of course, all these recommendations also vary on the version of Enscape that you have on your system. For the Mac, in terms of graphics cards, it's a little bit more simple because it's already kind of integrated in your MacBook. So not as difficult to find the right graphics card. I would say as well, as long as your Mac is not that old, you should be fine. I would recommend 3 categories of computers. 1, your basic at minimum computer specs that you should consider should be at least having 16 gigabytes of RAM, an Intel i7 processor, at least 500 gigabytes of storage space, and I would strongly recommend a solid state drive, an SSD card. And in terms of the graphics card, I would recommend the GeForce RTX 3060. Now for the second category, I would say this is your in-between computer specs. So something that is not your basic, but something right in the middle. And so I would recommend at least 32 gigabytes of RAM, an Intel i9 processor, and this will also future-proof your computer as well. And I would also recommend 1 terabyte of storage space, ideally an SSD card. I would have 500 gigabytes to boot up your programs, and then the other 500 gigabytes for your storage space for your program files and so on. I would recommend looking into liquid cooling. The prices of liquid cooling has dropped over the years, and it really provides better cooling for your computer. And in terms of a graphics card, I would look into the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080. Now for the recommended top tier, well, I wouldn't say this is a Ferrari level computer, but what I would recommend if you are doing more complex projects and you want to also have a machine that's future proof, these are the specs that I would recommend. And these are actually the specs that I'm currently looking at for my future desktop PC. And so I'm looking at 64 gigabytes of RAM, and I was thinking about going more than 64, but I do think it might be too much. So 64 is a nice amount. And I would also look into the Intel i9. And then in terms of storage space, I would ultimately look for more than a terabyte. A terabyte is nice, but if you're looking to use this computer for a while, I would look into at least 2 terabytes, if not 4 terabytes. But 2 terabytes would be good because you can have 1 terabyte to boot up your programs, and I would definitely get a solid state drive for this, and then another terabyte for your storage of your files, and that should last last you for a couple of years. And if you are a young professional and you're using your computer for professional work, you may want to look into more storage space, because the files do start to take up a lot of space in your computer, and you may want to look into 4 or possibly even 10 terabytes depending on what you're doing. In terms of the graphics card, I would recommend NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090, or if you can spend or you're willing to spend a bit more, you could look into the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090 Ti. I've read really good reviews about that graphics card. It is quite pricey, so you could look into the 3090, but if you do want to spend and put in a little bit more for your graphics card, although I think it might be a little too much, but it doesn't hurt to have a really good graphics card, you can look at the GeForce RTX 3090 Ti. And I would also look into liquid cooling. It really helps to cool down and keep your computer cool. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're also going to enjoy this video here. I hope to see you on the next video. Until then, bye!